All right. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is our fourth and final night of our web event series, kicking off our 2018 fundraiser. Just to say a few quick words before we get started. Our fundraiser is not a new concept for anybody who's been a member of the NHFA for a while, but it's a very, very important time for us. We are a growing nonprofit organization. Our staff is purely volunteer. Nobody on the board gets paid. None of our volunteers get paid. Any money that comes into the organization goes purely into our mission of educating and providing resources to the families that need them. So that's what the fundraiser is really about. It's giving us the money that we need to perform our services and to bring value back to our families. Typically, each year we ask for $8,000 during this fundraiser. That is our break-even cost. This year we're asking for a little bit more. You may have seen in some of our literature over the past couple of months, we're pushing for a goal of $12,000 this year. And that's because we have some very ambitious ideas of how to grow the organization and spread into some new areas moving forward. So you'll see more information about all of that over the coming weeks. But I just want to give a little bit of context as to why we're all here and what is allowing us to put on events like we are having tonight. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Tonight we're in for a very special treat. We are here to learn about body care basics. This is obviously a core skill for any of us that are working in the home funeral space. And you're going to hear from two women tonight that know this better than more or less anyone else I know. I'm very pleased that you have the opportunity to learn from both of them. So first I'll introduce Lauren. Lauren Carroll will be speaking tonight, a previous board of directors member. After working as a funeral director for many years, Lauren decided to leave the traditional industry to start her own nonprofit, Returning Home, through which she educates the community and the supporting families with home funerals and green burials. She's also a hospice volunteer, an urban farmer, and a mother. She holds community home funeral workshops and death cafes, working toward her goal of shifting the way that we interact with and accept death in our daily lives. Lauren has been a tremendous help for all of us here at the NHFA, and we're very happy that we're still maintaining this ongoing relationship. We're also going to be hearing tonight from our Vice President, Dani LaVoire, who has been working as a home birth midwife for almost 2 decades, and realized recently that the same skills of the heart that serve those birthing families can also help deepen the experiences of families dealing with death. So Dani is a hospice volunteer. She's a home funeral guide. She's a passionate public speaker, which I am not, so she'll be a lot more skilled at this than I am. She's also a writer, a mother, a wife, and a homesteader. Dani is also famous in my household for being the coolest person that I know, and offering to let me stay in her cabin in Arizona, for which I will forever be grateful. Her deepest passion lies in creating strong communities through transforming experiences of trauma. Her work here at the NHFA will be to creatively and energetically motivate our membership and to make a strong difference in the places where they live. So those are our speakers tonight. I'm very excited for all of us to share in conversations and to learn from them. And without further ado, let us kick off with our educational video. Again, I'm going to ask everybody to please respectfully remain on mute for the duration of the video, and then we can open it up for questions and answers after that.
Welcome to the National Home Funeral Alliance Introduction to Body Care. Thanks so much for tuning in to our fall fundraiser. I'm Dani LaVoire from the Board of Directors, and I live here in Prescott, Arizona, where I teach home funerals to my community.
And I'm Lauren Carroll. I'm also on the Board of Directors with the National Home Funeral Alliance, and I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where I teach workshops as well. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we really hope you learned something new today on Introduction to Body Care. Today we're going to be focusing on body care, but there's so many other aspects to a home funeral. The National Home Funeral Alliance has many references online, and I like to utilize these when I'm teaching my home funeral workshops. We have this book, The Essentials for Practicing Home Funeral Guides. This is great if you want to bring this information to your community or help other families. It has everything you're going to need, from supply lists to legalities, disclaimers, waivers, everything's in here. We also have this book, Undertaken with Love. This is great for families and support circles. It has poems, it has everything you need for creating sacred spaces. And we do have a book on ceremonies and sacred spaces online as well. You can also purchase our rack cards. These are great just to have to hand out to people in your community, but also to hand out at your workshops. Just talks about that they're safe and legal, the states that do require some extra additional help. These can be purchased online. And then we do have a slideshow. I bring this with me everywhere I go. This can be printed out, or if you have a laptop, you can show it. But it just goes over the history of home funerals and why we're seeing it emerge again in our society. So again, we're going to be focusing on body care, but there's so much more out there, and all the information is going to be available online at the National Home Funeral website.
When preparing for your home funeral, you want to pay attention to what room you'll be caring for the body in. It's good to choose a room that has a fan or an air conditioning, and if those aren't available, at least you want to have windows that can open for extra ventilation. Keep in mind the season, if it will be hot or cold when you're having your home funeral. There are some supplies that you want to acquire when preparing, and you have a list on our website, and here is an example of some of the things that you'll need. It's good to have some flowers and some sage and candles for making ceremony, if that's something that appeals to you. We use an eye pillow and a scarf for setting the features, a comb and shampoo for dealing with the hair, a pitcher and a bowl of water, and some washcloths and towels. One of the most important things that you'll have is some ice. Some home funeral guides recommend dry ice. I prefer to use regular ice packs and Techni ice. Essential oils can be very important, both for cleansing the body as well as for helping keep the anxiety of the people performing the home funeral at a minimum. We have oil for anointing and instruments for doing care of the mouth and cleaning up the ears and the nose and things like that. Other things that aren't on this table that you might want to have at hand are trash bags, gloves for universal precautions, some gentle soap, scissors, and cornstarch if the wounds or skin starts to weep. Hydrogen peroxide and alcohol are also really good to have on hand. At the beginning of every home funeral, I like to just take a look at the body, remove things like IVs, EKGs, or catheters.
This is also a good time to take note if you notice any open sores, or if the body's been autopsied, or perhaps had donations for bone harvesting. We're going to address those later during the washing, but it's always a good idea to prepare for those areas.
The next thing that I'll do is take and prepare my water for washing the body. I like to pour warm water into a bowl of dried flowers, and then add the appropriate essential oils for whatever is kind of going on in the situation. I always use lavender because it's got antimicrobial properties as well as is very relaxing for anxiety. And then sometimes it's good to use something uplifting like grapefruit, orange, frankincense, or lemon balm. By adding the essential oils, we begin to create a space that has that can hold us well while we do our work, and lighting sage and candles to create a ceremonial atmosphere.
This is also a great opportunity for families to read poems, to do prayers or blessings, or whatever feels natural for you. I bless your hair that the wind has played with. I bless your brow, your thoughts. I bless your eyes that have looked on us with love, and I bless your ears that listen for our voices. Once we've created the sacred space, we need to address the eyes and mouth. It's quite common for the eyes and mouth to be open at the time of death, so we're going to use eye pillows to set the features of the eyes, placing it gently over them. And then to close the mouth, we have a few options. We can use a silk cloth, wrapping it around their jaw and tying it above their head. This only needs to be done for about half an hour to an hour while the feature's set. Or, if you prefer, you can roll up a pillow, tilting their head back slightly and placing it under their jaw. This will support their features while they're setting, and this can be done while you're bathing the body or done shortly after death.
When facilitating a home funeral, one of the most healing moments is when the family gets to wash the body. I like to start with the extremities, as sometimes it's an easier place for the families to interact with before really getting into the torso and the face. So we start at the bottom and wash his feet. And this is a really great time to tell stories, to notice the scars on his body. Maybe his mother could tell stories about his life and the things that have happened, memories that you have, things that you did, hikes that you took together with your feet. Maybe he was a craftsman and you could tell stories about his hands and the things that he used to do with his hands when he was alive. I remember how your hands comforted me when I was sad. It always brought me great joy to be with you and hold your hands while we were walking. And as you move through the body, you can really honor each area by telling stories and interacting that way. So you're both honoring him with the purification ritual, as well as noticing places where there's still debris or fluids that need to be removed from the body. This is a great time to bring other family members and children into the room if that seems appropriate. And also, if you choose, you can use a pitcher of water to wash the hair. You would need help. Someone could hold the head and put a bowl underneath or use a trash bag to catch the water. And you would just gently use a pitcher to pour water over the head, use some shampoo and shampoo them up, and then rinse again. And it's a really nice way. The body looks so refreshed after having its hair washed. It's important to keep in mind that we do this work with the most grace that we can muster. There's always room in the space for laughter and all the different things that happen when you handle bodies. As we move the body around, air can escape and different fluids, which sometimes make people uncomfortable. And it's always good to remember that humor has space in the room.
Mm-hmm. So after bathing the top of the body, we're going to place a Chuck's pad underneath so we can catch some of the body fluids if they do escape. Now we are going to be using the Techni Ice to make sure that those bodily changes don't happen rapidly. This is also a good time to remember that you do want to make sure that the abdomen is always cool. If you start seeing any bloating or start hearing any sounds, that means that the body needs to be cooled down, or maybe the temperature of the room needs to be brought down a little bit. But we're going to place the Chuck's pad underneath by using some rolling techniques that will help make it an easier process. You definitely need more than one person to do this. So we fold the Chucks into an accordion style fold, which makes it easier to pull from each end. So we're going to roll him towards us. I like to grab a shoulder while she holds the sheet and a knee. We're going to put the arm over the chest and then pull up. I'm holding him, and she's going to place the Chucks underneath. Now we roll him back.
Is this on TV?
Take the other arm.
You can turn that off.
Over his
Audio over there.
And then she's going to put his shoulder over. And I will pull the other end of the Chucks out. We can lay him back down.
Oftentimes when you roll the body, it's the time that different things can come out, fluids can come out of the mouth or other parts of the body. And that's okay. We are totally equipped to handle anything that happens. If something should drain from the mouth, you can either use a toothbrush or a swab from the hospital and just clean what came out, use a cloth to wipe it away, and reset the features. At that point, oftentimes the jaw will be in its place and you can just move the lips as needed. You can also clean the legs if anything came out in that area, and you'll be good to go. This is a great time to use a paste of cornstarch and maybe sometimes other herbs to care for wounds and autopsy scars. And then we always apply extra ice to those areas. As I said before, I like to use ice packs or Techni ice. And what I love about the Techni ice is that you can actually cut it in strips and put it just the right size. So if he had a scar coming up here, I could cut the Techni ice and put just a little bit of it right as I needed it. Once you've washed and cleaned the body, the next thing you want to think about is whether or not you're going to dress the body or just cover it in a shroud or blanket. We will give you some techniques at this point for how you would dress a body. Some people like to just cut the back of the dress, slip it on, and tuck it behind, but we will show you now it's especially easy with a button-down shirt to dress somebody. First, what you do is you fold up the opposite side so that you can roll it and pass it underneath the body with help. I'm going to take his arm and put it in the shirt sleeve.
Man, these people like tattoos.
And then we'll work.
That guy laying there has several. She has some. She has one all down her arm. Hey, my microphone's not muted. Sorry about that.
If you could go on mute, please.
And lean him towards Danny while I reach under and grab the folded shirt. So I'm going to put his arm, cross his arm over, lift, and with some finesse, grab the shirt, and we have it under. And then I'll take this arm. Again, it makes sense to cut the shirts because this is very hard to manipulate the body once they have gone into rigor mortis. We did it. We're going to put the arm back down. And then you can button his shirt as needed. And then we'll work on putting on pants and shrouding the body. Once you have the body dressed, you'll want to know if you're going to be putting the body into a casket, just preparing it for transport to a crematory, and if you want to shroud the body. At this time, we'll take a moment to show you how to shroud the body. It's the same technique that we've been using for rolling. I have the shroud over here, which I'm just using a simple sheet. You could use grandma's blanket or something important to the family, and there's amazing things available for purchase. First, what you'll do is you'll just bunch it up so that the side that's going to be pulled through is closest to the body. I have it under his arm over here, and then we'll go ahead and roll him forward. And I actually like to just use the blanket like this to get him up really high, put it back down, and then pull the shroud through and reach it. Maybe. There we go. This is really good to have extra hands. Okay. So now we've got his shroud under him. We probably need to pull it through a little bit more. You can help me. It's not uncommon to have to reposition the body a few times. Whatever's most comfortable for you is what works. And we can just go ahead and do it this way and show it more. So I'll go ahead and, at this point, his hands will be here. So then we'll go ahead and wrap him just like a swaddled baby. He's so tall.
And I'm pulling the sheet all the way through so I can get it to pass on the other side. And then I have over there, I have the ties. I'm going to go ahead and do his feet. And we'll just move on up the body. Tying in different areas until it's complete. As we tie up the final tie, it's a good time to call in family members to say their final goodbyes before you bring the body to its resting place.
So it's really important to include family members, including children. It's something simple that they can do. Just place some flowers. But again, home funerals are for everybody.
Thanks for watching our video on Basics to Body Care. Be sure and stay tuned as we answer your questions, ask for your money, and teach you more about home funerals.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. So that was our initial video kickoff. And hopefully that gave all of us a nice basic understanding on where to start from. And hopefully everyone has some questions and we're inspired to move forward. So I think probably the most orderly way for us to take questions in is if you want to hop into the chat window, that way we're not all speaking over each other. You can type questions out into the chat and we can pulse them out and ask Lauren and Danny to respond to those questions. So you can send them directly to myself and I'll go through and filter, and that way we don't have to worry about too much overlap. So let me see. While I read through what's already in the chat, Danny and Lauren, if either of you want to add anything or start the conversation, now would be a great time.
Great. So I was just noticing Karen's question saying that her local funeral director cautions against home-directed work like this by warning, I'm just going to read it in case somebody can't see it, by warning that there may be all kinds of disturbing occurrences like leakage and purging of bodily fluids when repositioning the body. So I think this is one point that's really interesting to me, because one of the things, you know, like Tim said earlier, I do birth and I do death. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's all these people out there that assume that we are not capable of experiencing anything slightly uncomfortable, slightly icky, that there should be a whole network of people in authority positions, doctors, funeral directors, that keep us from ever having a slightly disturbing experience. And that might be true for some people, and that's why these home-directed funerals aren't for everyone, or that might be why some people go in the room and some people don't come in the room until after the body's really been cared for. But what I, just specifically to that point, what I always like to invite people to think about is life isn't always pretty. Sometimes things do come out of bodies when they're living and when they're dead. And as parents, as people in loving relationships, sometimes we clean up the fluids of our loved ones. And just like you can do that in life, you can do that in death. There are definitely ways to prevent those things from happening on a bigger scale. like using ice. Some people use dry ice. Like Lauren and I said in the video, I prefer using Techni ice because it's just a really flexible, easy product to use. When we just did a home funeral for my grandmother in August, the only thing my mother had on hand was frozen plastic water bottles that had been in her freezer that she takes and pops in her lunchbox. And I just pulled all of her frozen water bottles out of her freezer and used those on grandma. And that worked just fine. So again, regulating the temperature is going to be the thing that keeps those leakages from happening. That's going to be the most effective way to keep those from happening, but they do happen depending on what state the person was in just before death. But again, I always really encourage people to push their edge and ask, why am I being protected from seeing a little bit of leakage, a little bit of saliva or something coming out of a body? I think everyone's pretty capable of that.
Groovy. We have another question here from Tanya asking, do you ever use diapers or sanitary napkins to deal with leakage?
Do you want to take it, Lauren? Or?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. Chuck's pad, we used it in the video. That's easiest. Most people have those. You can buy them at the store. They cover the whole table or bed, so you don't have to worry about trying to put an adult diaper on. If you really think that there's going to be a lot of leakage, which usually after that first, you can do this thing where you push down on the bladder, so you release anything that's still in the body, kind of like a rolling motion. But a lot of people, when they die, if they're on hospice care or anything like that, they're really not eating or getting much fluid towards the end of their life. So that's really not a huge concern. And if you do the body care part that me and Danny just went over properly, that shouldn't be a continuing problem. So a Chuck's pad is usually good enough. And if you want to throw some cornstarch on the Chuck's pad as well, that absorbs any liquids or smells as well. That helps.
Thank you. And another great question here from Anna asking, why is it important to clean the body? If a person was just bathed shortly before their death, is it strictly necessary? Or is it something that's done more for the ritual of it?
That's a great question. And I would say the main reason I think is for ritual, unless there's an obvious reason. And again, it's every situation is going to be different. So there will be times when it's obvious that the body needs to be washed. The main reason is ritual. There are some traditions, like for example, Tibetan Buddhism, like you wouldn't touch the body. So it's really just based on what the needs of the family are. And no, you don't have to wash the body at all, but it's something that we focus on because a big part of the shift that can happen in the difference between a home funeral and a conventional funeral is that the interaction with the body can do a lot for moving the grief process along and helping the death, especially if it's a sudden death, not lodge in the body like a trauma. And so you might be familiar with other practices of using movement to as a therapy for trauma. So some people do yoga therapy, or you hear a lot of people doing wilderness therapy, or just the idea of walking and exercising being a way to deal with emotions. And so one of the things that I love about washing the body is that it really gives purpose and meaning for the family. A lot of times death happens and people are like, what do I do with myself? I feel like I need to cry. I feel like I need to have these specific feelings, but there's nothing really to do. Or maybe they've been offering so much care to this person who's dying, and then the death happens and there's this big void. And so washing the body, besides just cleaning the body and being a bit of common ritual, I think really helps people feel like they have worth and value, and it can be a really empowering offering of love to the person who's just died. And it yeah, it just gives us something to do, and that can be sometimes the best medicine when things are rough.
Thank you. Lauren, is there anything that you would add from your perspective?
I think Danny said everything, but I do think you don't need to bathe the body. I know a lot of times if you have hospice at home, the hospice nurse likes to help families clean the body before. It's just something that they like to do. It's more of that ritual that Danny was talking about. It's a way to connect with your loved one more time. I like to always think about it as, you know, if it's your own mom, you can think about all the times that she bathed you when you were little and growing up, or any time that, you know, you were sick and not feeling well. This is that one more moment to say, this is how much I love you. Thank you for everything you've done. And kind of like the poem that we read during it as well. It's a way to bless every part of their body one more time and just give gratitude. So no, you don't have to bathe the body, but is it something that's meaningful and important? Definitely.
So we have another question here, and I'm a little curious about this one myself. This is a question from Pamela. If the person that you are caring for has been in an accident or otherwise has some obvious cosmetic damage to their face, what can you do to make the best of that situation?
So I'll answer this one. As a funeral director, we would do everything that we possibly could to hide the fact that they were in an accident, using, you know, even fake body parts. They sell fake noses, fake ears. If somebody has been in an accident where they're very disfigured, there are ways to still be graceful and have the body present. I like to use this as an example a lot. When I was a funeral director, Colorado, where I live, is one of the states that does not require a helmet when riding a motorcycle. So we have a lot of motorcycle deaths here in Colorado, and we had a young man die, and he was completely decapitated. The family wanted to see him. The embalmer said absolutely not. I said, I know how important it is to be able to see the body, whether they look like themselves or not. So what we ended up doing was putting a helmet on with a bandana over the face, and that was plenty. The wife saw his hands, and that's all she needed to see, and she was able to lay on his body. She didn't need to see his face. She didn't need to see his head. She was holding his hand, and she knew right away, just like any of you would know right away if that's your loved one's hand or foot or anything. If they've been, just have some scratches, that's where you can do the bathing, lotions. But if it's something very severe, that's when you can get creative by putting a scarf over their head or anything else. But really, even if you have a full shroud and just have the body out, people know what somebody's body looks like. If they've slept next to their husband for 25 years, they're going to know that shape, and that's the comfort. That's the thing that they need to know, is that that's their loved one. So there are ways to work with bodies that have had disfigurements or have been in really bad accidents. The big part with this is convincing your coroner to release the body to you if there has been a lot of trauma and they think that that's going to traumatize you in any way. And that's something that I continue to work on, is saying that who are we to judge what somebody can handle and what they can't handle? It's a trauma to lose somebody that you love. I think it's a bigger trauma to take away the right to be able to see them or view them, or even just see the shape of their body one last time.
And I guess one thing I would add to that is, you know, my work in home funerals, I think one of the things I always bring it back to is your community. And it's a really good time when you're thinking about this sort of thing to wonder who's your clan and who's your tribe. And I think that, you know, especially if this was a parent having to deal with a child who had a really bad injury or, any situation where it's your loved one, that's where your closest people come in. And so maybe you'll be receiving the body, and there'll be some people who, have a really strong heart, a really strong stomach, and have the courage to be in the room and see that. And maybe it's not their husband or their child, but it's something that they're willing to do to show up for their friend. And so it might happen where if you're really wanting to avoid the funeral director and have it all happen at home, that your friend would come in and set up the body for you. And like Lauren said, drape the body so you don't see the head, or drape the body so you don't see an arm missing, or whatever the case may be. And then they really get that room set up for you to go in and have that experience with your child. So if we can work together to educate, not just one person in each community, but a group of people in each community, then we all know that we'll have the support that we need when our time comes.
Thank you for the detail from both of you on that. I have another question here from Akila asking, how do you prevent moisture and condensation from Techni ice or blue ice from getting the clothes and linens wet, particularly when lying in honor for 3 days?
I can just, so one of the really great things about the bodies is that once they get cold, because there's not metabolic processes happening inside, they kind of stay cold. So, if you spend that first little bit of time cooling the body, you often don't need as much ice in the next few days. Obviously you want to keep it cool, but you don't need quite as much. And then we just use towels. You can wrap the ice in towel and change that. And we did have that happen with my grandmother, where there was a little spot coming through, and we just took a little shawl and put that over where the wet spot was and covered it up. So again, just in the normal way you would with any other moisture, to mitigate it with a towel and using a little bit less ice as things go on. And and then just in reality, if something gets wet, just cover it up.
And dry ice doesn't, it's not going to cause any liquid, because dry ice, it evaporates. So just remember, when you do use dry ice, though, that you do need to have open airflow, because it is a gas that is being released as it's cooling down. And as far as, like Dani said, once you start, if you can keep that body really cool at the beginning, you don't have to do it as often, the changing of the ice, because the body will stay cold. You can use too much ice and freeze the body on accident. So you have to be aware of that as well. But just, things happen. I don't think anybody's gonna be concerned if there is a wet spot. Another thing you can do, though, is put the ice underneath the clothes on the stomach itself. It's not gonna hurt them or burn them or make them too cold. And then just put another towel and then the clothes on top of that, if that's something you're really concerned about.
Makes sense to me. Practical and straightforward. We have a second question from Tanya asking, what is the ratio or recipe for the cornstarch paste that you would use on wounds?
I'll answer that. There's no recipe. You're just going to make a paste, and I think Dani mentioned this. I would also add an essential oil as well if you'd like to, eucalyptus or lavender. Anything is fine. And you don't want it to be too wet. I like to just do, so when would you use corn paste? I guess would be a question to ask too. If there's like an open sore, so sometimes if somebody's had breast cancer, this is the only time I've really heard of it where people are concerned, or an autopsy scar. You could just put that in a container, just add a little bit of water. Cornstarch is one of those weird things that it kind of is hard and soft at the same time, so you want to be wary of that, but you'll be able to spread it. And then I always put an ACE bandage or some sort of bandage over it once I have the cornstarch down. And then that just prevents any more fluids or leakage coming out of open sores. But if you see them in that first kind of overall evaluation of the body before we start doing bathing, that's when you could do it, is just kind of make sure, okay, I need to have this ready to go, and then just put on enough. And you don't really need to go back and change it. If you see through the ACE bandage any sort of discoloration, then you may not have enough cornstarch. So you can go back and just add a little powder directly on top of that.
We have a question from Jennifer asking, how do you wrap the head and feet? Would you place the shroud kitty corner rather than straight on the sides? And how would you recommend fastening that shroud?
So it really depends what you're working with. There are shrouds that have, you know, ties attached to them if you've gotten some, like a commercial shroud. Whereas if you're just using a blanket, you really just have to work with the size of the blanket. I think definitely going like in a diamond shape so that there's one triangle at the head and one triangle at the bottom. That's a good way to do it, so that the feet, you're covering the feet and the head that way, and then wrapping it around just like you would you know, wrap a baby. For those who have swaddled a baby, it's a really similar thing. But you know, again, it's so many things are just situation by situation. It depends what you're working on, the size of the person. If you're, you know, some people are just doing the shroud more for the appearance of the body when it's lying in honor, as opposed to, are they going to be shrouded and put directly into the ground in their shroud? So really just trust yourself and play with it, and allow it to go imperfectly the first time. I think that you might get it and then it doesn't cover it up just right. You might have to scooch it around some more a little bit, and that's okay.
And I'll add to YouTube. Right?
What's that?
There's lots of YouTube. You can watch different shrouding techniques on YouTube. I think, I can't remember the name of the shroud company right now, so I'm not going to say it. But they have a few different videos to show you different ways to wrap the body. And the same thing, if you're going to be burying them directly in the shroud, there's different techniques on how to tie ropes. Some shrouds already have ties in them, so they're just there to tie them. You can really do whatever you want with a shroud, and that's kind of the nice thing about it. You can make it look, you know, where you see the shape of the whole body, or you can have it more loose and just add a lot of flowers around it. It really just depends on the material and what it's being used for, like Dani said.
And sometimes you can leave the piece that's going to go over the face. So let's say you want to have the body shrouded with their face visible while they're, you know, while they're lying out and people are coming to see them. And then at the end, before they're going to go in the ground, you can put that headpiece over last and just tie it with a tie around the neck and do it that way.
We have a question from Julie asking, do you remove pacemakers? And do you or would you use super glue on the cut or an autopsy cut?
All right, I'll start this one. I would not remove a pacemaker. It's not really necessary. I mean, if it's something that really concerns you, yeah. If the body is going to be cremated and not going to be buried, then the crematory would remove the pacemaker before the cremation takes place. So that's not the family's responsibility. I just want to say that if the body is going to be cremated after laying out for 3 days, the crematory will remove the pacemaker for the family. And the other question is super glue. I love super glue. It's up to you. If that's something you feel comfortable and you think that that's an added necessity, use super glue. We use super glue on bodies in funeral homes for everything. So if that's something that you feel more comfortable doing, you can. I always tell families it's natural for the eyes and the mouth to open. That's what funeral homes use super glue for the most part, is keeping the eyes and mouth shut. So I don't recommend doing that just because I think it's natural. But if you feel more comfortable doing that on the incisions, you'd have to dry them or pat them dry first before it would work. But I think the cornstarch and the bandages and tape work really well.
Can I jump in on the pacemakers?
Sure.
So I remove pacemakers like every day, and I'll tell you why. Even in a home funeral situation, the family is responsible for whether or not there's a pacemaker in there. So most crematories will say, they'll ask you, does this person have a pacemaker or a pain pump or a neural stimulator, anything with a lithium battery in it? If they don't know that it's in there and it explodes in the retort and causes damage, the family is financially responsible. One of the things that they sign in the paperwork to have someone cremated says that they accept responsibility for damage to the retort. So while I don't agree or disagree, I don't have an opinion either way whether or not a pacemaker should be removed in a home funeral setting. I do strongly urge you to know that not only are you financially responsible if there's damage to the retort, but crematory workers have been seriously injured when they weren't told that there was a pacemaker in a body or a pain pump or something like that. So you kind of have a moral obligation as well to the safety of the crematory workers. So if you or your family choose to leave the pacemaker in, for goodness sake, please make some sort of official notification to the crematory. There's my 2 cents.
Yeah, when you do the paperwork, there is a section that says, "Is there a pacemaker?" So I don't think I've ever met with a family who didn't know that their loved one had a pacemaker or a device like that. I think that would be more rare. But they will on the cremation paperwork ask that because it will explode and you don't want to do any damage.
In my particular situation, whether I'm doing a home funeral or a regular cremation, I, as the funeral director, am responsible for that. So. Sorry, that was my cent worth.
No, it's really great. It's really great input. And I think this maybe is leading into Karen's question that I'm seeing on the side, but what's really important difference for us all to always be remembering is that as home funeral guides, we're not taking on any responsibility for the care of that body, that it is indeed the next of kin who is quote unquote acting as the funeral director in the situation of a home funeral, that we are not acting as funeral directors, as home funeral guides, that we are just giving information to the families about what needs to be done. So, again, Karen asked about if we are touching the body or if we're allowed to be giving direct care for the body. I would venture to say that in many situations, it wouldn't even be legal for us to be removing pacemakers, that would be something that the family would need to get educated about how to remove the pacemaker on their own, or that they need to be asking their doctor to do so before leaving the hospital, or for hospice to do so, or however that works, or make sure that they're educated in their very particular situation about what needs to be happening for the funeral, for the crematory that they're going to, and go from that perspective, from that place, remembering that we are not taking any legal responsibility for the care of the body, but we are doing education so that the family can do so on their own. Tim, do you want to read Karen's question, or should I just go ahead and go into that?
I responded to Karen directly with a little bit of direction. With state by state variations, I just want to be careful of getting too in the weeds on that. So Karen and I are addressing her question on the side, but we also have a question here from Tanya asking if you ever bring a table, like a massage table, with you to the homes in case the family chooses not to use a bed or their own table or any other furniture pre-existing in their home, if that's part of the standard kit.
I think that's one of the things that you should know before. So if you have done pre-planning with the family, that's something you would bring up. Are we going to be laid out on a bed? Would you want me to bring a massage table to use in lieu of the bed? If it's something really, really last minute, again, I think that's something really important to ask over the phone, because I wouldn't want to carry a massage table everywhere with me all the time. And most of the work, for me in particular, it's usually beforehand. We're preparing. It's not just, hi, my mom just died. I decided right now I want a home funeral. What do I do next? It does take some preparation, and it takes a little bit of time. But those are all things that I would normally ask before I even come over to the house, because that would be the last thing I want to do is show up and they say, we're in a studio apartment and there's nowhere to lay the body. Can you help us? That's something that you need to find out beforehand. And that kind of brings, nobody has asked this yet, but that's a common thing to kind of find out beforehand. What's the environment of the home? What are things that I should prepare the family for? Is this home the right place for a home funeral, or is it not? There's things that the families can do to prepare beforehand too. Clearing a space, making sure that there's proper airflow in the room that they want to use for the home funeral. So sometimes, you know, there might be a small bedroom in the back, but it has no windows or it doesn't have a fan. So it's important for us to educate the family that, you know, maybe in this instance, the living room might be a better place to have the body laid out, because there are windows, there's a big fan here, there's an air conditioner or whatever. Because a lot of families, they just don't even think about those things, and that's where we want to come in and help them and guide them. And so that would be a time when you would also be able to ask, okay, well, if we can't use the bedroom, maybe we can use this room, and can I offer a massage table? Or I mean, you could really use anything at that point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I keep a massage table that I can lend to families, and I just always like to give a plug again that as home funeral guides, if we're doing really solid education, then lots of times we don't have to be there when the death happens. A lot of times we are doing education with the families beforehand and empowering them to really take control as much as possible. You know, Sarah Cruz shared the story recently of the family that she, you know, guided through mostly just with phone calls. And many of us have had that experience as well, that, you know, there might be some things that they borrow from me, come over and grab some Techni ice, or I drop off my massage table. But a lot of the times I know I'm doing my best work when they don't need me at all, and that I've done enough education that they feel empowered to have their home funeral all on their own.
And that's perfectly stated. I think that's what we're all about, right? It's about empowerment and education and self-reliance. So we are just about approaching the top of the hour. I have one last question. So let's make this the final question of the night. Dani and Lauren, if both of you want to weigh in on this and maybe provide any further commentary or further clarification, that would be great. And we can start wrapping things up. So this question comes in from Sally. If you're having a home funeral and shrouding the body, and the cemetery comes to pick up the body, there might be a second ceremony at the gravesite, probably with an expanded group, etc. And would there be some repeating of ritual there? So I think this really comes down to a question of how you are doing work to personalize or change what that ritual is in the home funeral environment versus more of the public or so-called traditional funeral environment. I believe is where we're going with this. So Dani, since I'm looking at your face on screen right now, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, and you know, I'm perfectly poised to answer that question, because that's exactly what just happened for my family in August. My grandmother died in the hospital, and my family knew of my desire to bring my grandmother's body home, though nobody was really interested in that. They all thought I was a little bit nuts. And I just said to them over and over again, please just trust me. You know, most of the times in the situation, there's always someone who's not totally comfortable with the idea, but that if you can just trust and go through with the process, that it's really beautiful. So they agreed. My mother reluctantly agreed, and we brought my grandmother's body home from the hospital and kept her home for about 24 hours, washed her, cared for her. My nieces and nephews and my small children were there. My cousin and I were able to sleep in the bed with her that night, and we just had a really amazing vigil. But my grandmother wanted to be buried in the cemetery where her parents were, which was an Orthodox Jewish cemetery, and therefore needed to go through the funeral home. And my grandmother was very well known in the town. It was the town that she went to high school in. There was tons of people that wanted to come and be at her funeral. So it was an awesome compromise. We had, you know, the really, really intimate time at my mother's house with my family, caring for her body, and the things that we needed to do at the funeral home and then later at the graveside were really different than what just me and my cousins and my siblings needed. And it was fantastic. We had a beautiful funeral with poetry and different people speaking about my grandmother at the funeral home. And then, as is a custom, especially for a Jewish burial, we went to the graveside, and everyone was hooting and hollering and singing. And some of you might have seen some of the pictures from the last notes of the field. The children all digging with shovels and covering my grandmother's coffin, and we were dripping with sweat because it was August in New York. And it was just the ritual. What I love about ritual is that a little bit different from ceremony, ritual really has the opportunity to take what's already happening and just make it slightly more apparent. It asks the truth that's already in the room to just linger a little bit longer. And so if you really allow ritual to just be what's happening right now, what's going on in the room right now, and how can I just linger in the space of what's already happening? Most of the time in birth and in death, it's not for us to make something special of the moment. The moment is already special enough. And all we're asked to do is notice it with as many of our senses as we possibly can and stay in that space a little bit longer. So when you're at home, you stay in that space a little bit longer. You're with the body. You're very, very tender. You're with your closest people. In the funeral hall, it's a little more public. You're a little better dressed. You have your words a little more prepared. And then when you're outside at the graveside, maybe it's beautiful and you're taken in nature, and like my family, hooting and hollering and singing songs and toes in the dirt, and just really noticing what's happening and allowing that space to be held. That answer it.
I don't really have anything to add to that. Danny said everything that I think to say. I think that the gravesite is part of the ritual. It is part of the ceremony. So there's not really anything, you don't need to repeat what you did at home, because what you did at home was in the home. What you do at the gravesite is what you do at the gravesite. And depending on if they're shrouded or if they're in a casket at that point, I mean, that's when everybody can get involved. Everybody can throw flowers or take a handful of dirt and place it on top of the casket or the shroud after it's been lowered. It's really whatever feels right for you and your family. I don't really think I've ever seen a difference between a home funeral gravesite service and a funeral home one, other than maybe the casket looks a little bit different and there's not a big casket spray, but it can be almost exactly the same. You can still have chairs out there because that's all set up by the cemetery. So you can talk to the cemetery beforehand too and ask them if there's anything, you know, unique that the family may want to do at that time, like releasing butterflies, or these are all things that you can add that make the gravesite a special place other than the home. Like I said, you can, they're two separate places, so you can have two different experiences.
Beautifully stated. I think that's a perfect place to bring our session to an end around this conversation of ritual and meaning and finding closure as we find closure ourselves this fine Sunday evening. So first of all, I would like to thank everybody for joining and attending and participating, bringing your questions. This has been great. I'm really happy and excited to see such enthusiasm and energy coming out of our group and our membership, as it were. So important things first. Thanks. If we didn't get to your question or you have any additional follow-up questions, you can contact us directly at info, I-N-F-O, at homefuneralalliance.org. And that email will come in directly to our board, and we will share that around and get you the information and the answers that you need. And of course, you can also find additional educational components up on our website, homefuneralalliance.org, where we will also be hosting these recorded sessions, both tonight's and the sessions from earlier this week. So you can catch up and review all of that on our website here in a few days. Again, I would like to thank everybody for attending. I would like to humbly ask at this point, if you enjoyed this content, if you would like to see more of this content and would like to help enable us to spread this work, spread this education, and do bigger and better things in the years to come, we live off of donations, and we will happily accept anything you feel comfortable giving. This is a fundraising drive. We do have a very high goal, but don't feel like any amount is too small. If you're willing to donate $1, $5, $10, that's fantastic. We're happy to take any support that we can get, because it's really that support that allows us to do this work and to perform events such as this. So thank you again, and we will call this the end, and we look forward to seeing all of you next year, just outside of Minneapolis at our next conference, and more information about that will be coming out to you soon. So thank you all, and good night.